Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of the Human Organics tutorial series. That's a very long title, but that's what it is. The previous 2 videos we focused on modeling and shaping the main body of this organic, but now we're going to essentially get into modeling everything else involved with the organic, so the clothing, any props and hair, things like that. We're going to model all of those in this video. I also have a confession. I did remodel one of the arms since the last video. After I was acting out the pose myself just a little bit, I felt like this was a much more natural angle for this arm to be, and that was my reasoning behind it, but I think it does also just look a little better. Before we begin, I want to note that I will be using various plugins or mods throughout this video, and I'm doing all of this in version 1.16.5, so if you are following along, just know that everything I'm using is from that version. Alright, let's get started. When I add clothing, the very first thing we need to think about is how is this going to be layered on top of the organic? We want to build the underlying layers first and then just gradually work our way up to the outermost layers. That's pretty self-explanatory. Now, the first step that I do when adding clothing is usually just to paint directly on my figure where the clothing is going to go. I usually do this with Go Paint, however you could do an ordinary World Edit brush, however you prefer to paint it on there, but I'm going to be using Go Paint. And I sometimes use a placeholder block, but for this one I am just going to use a base block of around the general color I know it's going to be for the dress, and I can always change it later. And I can go ahead and start painting this directly on the organic if I wanted to, but when I do this, it is going to paint the whole thing all the way through. And usually I would do this and it's fine, it's no problem for me, but I did want to show you a couple other things to think about and consider when you're painting that will give you a little bit more control and you might think is useful. So let me go ahead and undo that. And I'm going to show you this World Edit Tracker command. And this is from a special plugin by JMCK. As far as I know, this is only available on the Builders Refuge server. And what this does is it lets me see which demasks or masks I have enabled. It's nice to have it there so you can kind of see exactly what I'm doing. Anyway, the first thing that we can do is, if we only want to paint the surface of this, there is a mask in Fast Async World Edit where we can just do Gmask surface, and this will only let us paint on the surface blocks. It's pretty self-explanatory. So if you wanted to be less destructive with your organic, or you only wanted to paint the outside layers, you could do the Gmask surface, and now I should be able to paint on here, and it's only affecting those outer layers, as you can see. Or you can always use surface mode and Go Paint. I completely forgot that this existed. So that is what I'm going to try this time around. I usually don't use this command, but I figured I'd try it this time. And it is nice, like I said, if you wanted to have a more non-destructive way of painting your organic. Okay, I looked at my reference and now I want to change the block I'm using because I don't like it. I should be able to just, paint over this and should get back to where we left off. I think this is a closer color than the one I was using before. But anyway, so I'm just looking at the dress overall and how it's going to fit on top of her. I'm not thinking about too much about the colors and different layers at this point right now. I'm just trying to get the basic outline. So this is step 1, is to paint all around where you want this to go. I'm going to stop here for now with this top part, and because I know this is going to be part of her dress and it's going to detach later, I'm going to paint her legs to be whatever the color is for the tights that she's wearing, which is a kind of foresty green, and that's going to be kind of hard to find a good placeholder for that. But let me go ahead and find a good green to use. We'll just use green wool for now, and I'm going to put that on top of all of the legs. I could also do brown wherever the boots go. It really just depends on what is going to be easiest for you in the long run. Alright, you see how that just painted over there on the arm? I do have another command that I want to show you that will help if you do have that kind of problem where you don't want to paint other parts and because your sphere brush might be too big. You could make the sphere brush smaller, but I'm going to show you another thing you can do. So if I make a selection around just the part that I want to affect, so I just want to affect these legs here, and I'm just going to shift my selection over so that arm is not selected, and maybe down a little bit too. Oops, that was not the right position. If I only want to paint inside my selected area and I didn't want to affect that arm, I can change my G mask to be to mask the region like so. And now it's only going to affect the blocks inside of this selection. So that is a good way to also control like where you are painting. Now, I don't think I can combine the region and the surface because now that I've done that, I don't have the surface mask, and this is going to be painting all the way through. I was wrong. It is possible. Just G-mask the region and use Go Paint's surface mode. Now, I think I will go ahead and put brown for the boots because that will help me figure out exactly how long I'm going to want them. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and paint all of this. And we can go over the whole thing again with the brown. It might be easier just to do this. So I'm going to paint all of that green, and now I'm going to change my mask to just go on top of the green wool. And I just got a placeholder brown block, and I'll figure out around how tall I want these boots to be. It doesn't matter if they're the exact shape I want them, but I think they're supposed to be slightly taller in the back based on my drawing. So I'm just going to do that. Make this one go about the same height. And fix the green spot that I didn't fill in. I don't know why I don't just do the replace command because sometimes I feel like it would be easier. I just like painting everything. So here I have a very basic layout of the clothing, or the start of the clothing. Obviously there's lots of details we're missing in the dress and such, but this is a good foundation for us. You're going to approach the building process differently for every organic. Everyone is unique, and you're just going to have to figure out the best way to do it for whichever organic you're doing. There's no other way around it, really. You're just going to figure it out. Now for mine, I'm trying to figure out the best way I want to do this. I see there's a little piece of brown cloth underneath of her dress right here, so I think I'm going to go ahead and find a good block for that, or at least something that can be a placeholder. I think the brown mushroom block is the perfect color, so I'm going to just put this right there just to represent that little piece of cloth because I know it's going to be underneath and I don't want it to move or anything. So I'm just going to put that there, and let me go ahead and show you this other command that I use quite often. I'm going to use it more when I get to texturing, but I really love the replace tool command. This is all it is, this command right here, and it just lets me left click a block to select it and then right click to place it. And I use this, like I said, a lot more for texturing, but right now it is nice for this too, just to get that brown section. And I can refine that later and everything. We're just getting ourselves started. The next thing I need to think about is the depth of the clothing on the figure. So right now everything is skin tight. It all blends right into the skin, as you can see, which is not what we want. Usually what I like to do is add an extra layer of blocks to add more depth. If we want to do this to a large area, we just need to make a selection around the entire blocks that we want to do it with. So in this case, I want to select all of my lapis. With Gmask, I'm going to Gmask Air, which is 0. This command really only works if we do that. Then we're going to replace around our lapis blocks and brackets with more lapis blocks. And as you can see, that automatically bumped everything up. So let me just undo, redo, and you can see what it's doing. Now that I've done that, however, I don't like how much it has changed my main shapes. I don't like how much thicker it has made the arms and everything. So I don't think I will use this method for this organic right now. I think it's going to be easier for me to go in by hand and just raise up the edges of the clothing, just enough to where it isn't flush with the skin. So as I go around doing this, I'm thinking about which parts are supposed to stick up a little higher than the parts underneath. Obviously, anywhere where the skin is right next to it, we want to make sure that that's bumping up a little bit. And I know that up here on the shoulders, it's all going to get covered by a cape eventually, so it's not as big of a deal up there. And it's not as big of a deal in the arms either, because I know I'm going to be adding more layers on top of that. I think I need to start adding some more larger sections of clothing before getting too detailed with it, before I add too many wrinkles and things like that. I'm going to use the loft tool from Archeon to help me lay out some of these larger fabrics. I'm not going to explain it in great detail here, but I do have a loft tutorial also on my channel that you can check out if you want to know more about it. And I can show you some alternatives for loft, but for now I'm just going to give you a few basic tips that I hope will help. If you are familiar with loft already, you know that we can use this to create clothing very quickly and very easily. So what I'm doing is just selecting points. I'm thinking about the lines or the shape of my skirt or the skirt of the dress, and I'm selecting those vertically down. I think in this instance it is going to be easier to do it vertically, and I want to make sure that this is going plenty long. If it goes a little bit longer, that's fine because I can always trim it, but I just don't want to have to add to it. Now, something to remember though, with loft, especially when doing a loft this big, I like to do it in smaller sections usually, because this gives me more control when making the fabrics, but it also allows me to make more details more easily. So the closer I put them together, the tighter the wrinkles are going to be, etc., etc. Basically, all you're doing is visualizing the vertical curves of the cloth, and then we're going to use the loft to connect all of those. You can kind of see it with the selection. It's connecting all the dots for us in the selection visualization, but that's essentially all it is. We're just thinking about individual curves and how those connect to make a larger shape. So I'm just going to set this one little section of a loft. It's actually a pretty big section, but this will give you an idea. So I'm just going to set this to the same block we used on the top, so 22, and we'll just do that. Notice that I still have my G mask on, so it is still masking air, and I would recommend doing that when using loft so that you're not destroying any of the underlying shapes. And that's all that is right there, is it just didn't detect that to replace around it. So already I'm not liking this. I don't like this really deep fold I have going on right there, so I'm just going to clear my whole selection. LOC is the shortcut, and I'm just gonna start over. And this is why it can be useful to just do them in tiny pieces at a time. Like I said before, it just gives you more control. If I wanted to redo something, I can just undo the last little section I did, rather than undoing the entire thing and having to select the entire thing at once. And it does look more natural too, I think, when you do it this way. There's many techniques and ways that you can use loft. You'll just have to experiment and figure out the best way that works for you. Over here, I have another problem where you see it's kind of bulging out. I don't think that's how this dress would flow. I think if anything, it would go in instead of bulging out. So I'm going to redo that section as well. Just like everything else we've done with this organic so far, there is no shortcut or no easy way to do things. It's a lot of experimentation until you get what you want. I'm going to interrupt my building for a brief moment and just show you some alternatives there are to loft. If you don't have access to Archeon or Loft, you can use this alternative called the spline brush in Fast Async World Edit. It doesn't work nearly as well as Loft, but it is an option. And at the time of me making this video, it is not working properly in 1.16, so hopefully they fix that. But I am going to go in 1.12 right now. Right now I'm in 1.12. I'm going to show you how it works really quickly, just so you can get an idea. And I can link to a more thorough tutorial, but this is just the general idea. First, you're going to need a convex selection, so just make sure to get the convex selection type. And then we're going to create a basic curve. So we're just going to create some kind of curve. We're thinking about the edges of our cloth and how we want it to be shaped. So imagine this is the edge of a cloth. I'm just going to do a simple curve there. And now I'm going to imagine what the other side of the cloth is doing. So I'm going to make a parallel curve to this one and Again, just kind of going with the whatever flow of the cloth I want. And let's go ahead and do another curve there. Now, the spline brush is interesting because it's going to take these two curves that we've created and then connect them together. So I have to get a second brush, and let's do BR spline, and then I'm going to do 42, which is iron, and give it a radius of 100. So go ahead and enter that. Now, how this works is it's going to do its best to look at these curves and try to connect all the dots by itself. So what we have to do, all you have to do, is select one end of this curve and then select the other curve, the very end of it. And after you've selected each one, then go ahead and click this one again, and it's automatically going to try to connect those as far as it can. Now you can see here it stopped because I think it's because that curve reached the end of it, so it didn't have any more to connect, so it stopped there. Also, we did only give it a radius of 100, but I don't think that really affected this because this curve was shorter than this one, so that's why it did that. You can see it doesn't create as smooth of a curve as Loft does, and even Loft isn't perfect, but this is way more messed up. It's got way more mistakes and stuff. Look at the holes it's caused and just very bumpy textures all over the place. But it is an option still if you have nothing else to do. But Loft is better, so yeah, definitely use Loft if you can. If you don't have access to any of these commands and you still want to make clothing, don't worry, you can still do it by just using World Edit and then also doing it by hand. It's not that difficult. If you can smooth by hand, you can make clothing by hand. So let's go back to these two curves, and let's say I want to start filling this in by hand. So I did just make those curves with World Edit. So all I'm going to do now is section it off into smaller pieces using different curves. So I'm just going to go horizontally after I created those initial curves. And let me find that curve command again. I cannot see what I'm typing, so alright, do that curve there. And then all I have to do here is think about how I want to be in the middle, how I want that fold to go. And I can make these as far away or as close as I want. The closer I put them together, obviously, the better idea I have of where everything goes. But you can see that's creating a very steep slope there. But anyway, the main point is you can section it off into little pieces like this and then just start filling those in by hand. It's kind of the same concept as building terrain in survival. You're just gonna section it off into little pieces and work on it a little bit at a time. And this does give you more control with smoothing because you're doing it all by hand. But that's basically all you do. If you only had access to World Edit and none of these other fancy commands, or even if you had no commands, you can do the entire thing by hand. You just have to think about the curves and fill them in. Just break it off into little pieces and tackle it one section at a time. It might be a little time consuming, but it certainly is a valid option. I think it's good to be able to do this whether you need to or not, so it's always good practice as well. Back to our main organic and using the ever-beloved Loft tool because it really is that much easier to use if you have it. And I'm going to continue adding to the dress and redoing sections. I'm trying to think about the flow of the fabrics and how her movements will affect that as well. There is a little bit of hand smoothing I'm doing, but I'm not being extremely thorough with it right now. It's just enough to where I'm satisfied with it to continue on. That being said, as amazing as Loft is smoothing it very nicely right away, it still may require you to go in and do some hand smoothing, which I did talk about in the previous video, how to look out for smoothing and how to approach it. I might revisit this dress later and add some additional folds, but this is a pretty good start. Still using the Loft tool, I'm continuing to add to the dress. But I think I've reached a point where I can add some additional details to this as well, so I'm going to start adding some sleeves, making sure that, just like we did with the other parts of the dress, that it's sticking out away from the skin and isn't going flush with it. Now, when it comes to adding some of these additional things, I'm going to be using a lot of placeholder blocks because it will be easier to model it with these blocks versus with a block like the mushroom block where the textures will get messed up when I punch them and break them. So I figured it's easier just to have the placeholder blocks in the modeling stage, so I'm not messing with any of the textures, especially for blocks such as brown mushroom or bone block or things that have different orientations or different textures that can be applied to them. Next part is simple. I'm just going to paint the extra details on the dress. Again, using placeholder blocks and smoothing some sections as needed. It doesn't matter what placeholder blocks you use, but I do know that the gold blocks will be the same texture eventually, so I'm taking that into consideration. Next, I'm going to paint on her glove-like things. I don't really know what you call them, but for these, I'm just going to be painting the surface layer because this fabric is supposed to be very, very thin. Then I don't want to raise it an extra block away from the skin because I don't want it to look that much thicker. It's supposed to look very thin, so I'm just painting it directly on top of the model. Doing more of the same, I'm going to continue doing that for other parts like the boots, as well as adding a tear to the edge of the dress for a little bit of detail. But I want to make sure the dress looks completed before moving on to the next layer up, which would be the cape. Even though a lot of this dress isn't going to be seen underneath the cape, I'm just weird in that I like to make sure it all looks nice. All I'm using for the cape is just the loft tool, and I'm just taking it one little section at a time and just gradually piecing it together. Occasionally, if I find something where I don't like the shape of the fabric or how it's going, I might delete a section and redo it, and continue to fine-tune it by hand smoothing. Now you can't really see it in the picture, but I did also give her a hood on the cape, so I made sure to model that as well. Even though a lot of this is going to be covered by the hair, I model it for accuracy. I think we're ready to start modeling some of the props she has, and really she only has two. She just has the staff that she's holding, and she also has a pouch, which could count as a prop, or it could be just part of her outfit, part of her clothing. But I did want to show you the staff because now that I think about this, when I first modeled this organic, I modeled it around this angled stick that we had placed. But if I want to model the staff accurately, it's a lot easier for me to do that on a straight angle and then rotate the entire thing afterward. So what I'm going to do is completely start over with the staff, or I'm not even going to use this line that I had created before, because now that I think about it, that's not the way I typically go about doing it. I typically model the whole thing first and then rotate it. So I'm going to start off with the same size as this. If we look at the base of it, we can see it's just a basic cross shape. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and start modeling this like I normally would. I don't know if I'm going to make it any thicker than that, but yeah, we can start with this, and I'm going to select around this, and we're just going to stack it up as tall as we want. And honestly, the taller, the better, because we can always shrink it if we have to. So let's say this is the height of our staff, and I do need to take into account that once it rotates, it might be a little bit shorter, but I think this is pretty good. I'll just make it this tall. I'm going to try making the little ellipsoid shape at the top of this first, and I think I'm just going to try generating it with the sphere command. I'll just use a placeholder. It's the same as the one we're using for the dress, but it will work. And then I always forget which coordinate is which, but I need to enter coordinates for the width each axis, so I don't remember which one is which. I'm assuming it's X, Y, Z, but let me see what this looks like. Okay, that's obviously too big, I believe, so let me undo that. I don't want to make this hollow, although I could, but I'm purposely not making it hollow. I could do an H sphere if I wanted to do that, but I don't want this one to be hollow. Let's try 3, 3, and let's try 3, 7, 3. And let me get out of here. Alright, that's actually pretty close to the shape that I want. Now, is it the correct size I want? That's what I'm not positive on, but that's roughly the shape that I'm going to need. I think I do want to make it slightly smaller, so let me try this again. This is a command I don't use too often, so we'll try 252 and see what that does. Can I use through? That put me at the bottom, okay. But let me see how big or small this turned out to be. I think if I back up and look at it, I think that's a pretty decent size. It's not too overwhelming. Seems like a good gemstone size because that's essentially what this thing is. And I'm going to move it onto the staff that we have over here. If I can't paste in the right spot, I could pretty easily move it. Okay, I see where I need to paste it now. Now I just have to add those squiggly stick things that go above this. And I already have my convex selection. I'm just going to select a few points around here, putting them fairly close together so it can be a little more twisty. And I could use the curve command for this, but I think I'm going to end up using the spike command instead. And I'm also going to make sure I'm Gmasking air, so I'm not affecting the stone underneath. But I'm going to try spike. This is also from Archeon, just like Loft is. But it does the same thing as curve. It just lets you set the start and end radius versus it all being the same thickness all the way through. So we got 57, which is our diamond block. Let's do a start radius of 3 and an ending with a radius of 1. And there you can see it's going to gradually start bigger and then gradually get smaller for us. I'm probably going to go in there and clean it up by hand anyway, but this is a good start. And I don't really have any particular order these go in. I think in my sketch it was super random as well, so I'm just going to go around and randomly place a few of these and just try to make an interesting pattern or design on top of this. Now, once I do rotate this staff, it will kind of mess up with all of these shapes that I have going on here, but it's the thought that counts, and at least I kind of tried to make it look nice. Alright, I think I'm going to take this one, pull it up a little bit. You can also do this if you want to just manually shape it and do some things. That's also an option. You can always build things by hand. There's some things about this I don't like, but I'll mess around with it until I get something I like. Alright, this is what I have for a little bit of decoration on the top. It's all going to change once we rotate it anyway, so I didn't mess with it too much. I tried not to be too picky. But now I'm going to take this staff we've created and try to match the rotation of this one over here. So I have the whole thing selected. I just need to copy it first and then we can rotate it. Always make backups of everything. I know I've said that before, but always, just always do it. And we're going to rotate. If you're not sure what axis you need to rotate it on, I always push F3, not F2 for screenshot, but F3. And I look at those little colors in the very center of my screen. I know that the green is Y, the red is X, and I think the blue is Z. So I need to rotate it on the Z axis just by looking at that. And I'm going to rotate it 0, 0. Let's try 15 on the Z axis. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be positive or negative. I always forget, so I always have to experiment. Let's paste -A and see what that did. Did it even paste? Oh, there it is. So, okay, we do need to go in the negative axis, but I also need to make it less steep. I think that was too much of a rotation. And I'm just going to copy it again and start it over because I'm kind of lazy. So, okay, let's do rotate 0, 0, -10 this time. Also, I want to give it a little bit of rotation on the y-axis, which is the first one. So I want to rotate a little bit more toward us, which is to the left, so it needs to go in a negative direction. That is, we'll try -10, 0, -10. And we'll see what that gives us. Okay, so yeah, that did do what I was expecting it to, but if I look at the top of this one that we've already created, I think it needs to rotate a little more, or maybe just ever so slightly less in that direction. I'm just going to keep messing with it until I get a rotation I'm happy with. I think this angle is satisfactory for now. This organic I'm not being too picky about, so we'll just go with that. And I'm going to delete this diamond that we have over here. It looks like I did not select this very well. Let me put that there. Let me expand my selection by 20, and let's replace 57 with air. Oh, and turn off our Gmask. And try again. Alright, now let's select the newly modeled and rotated staff over here. Looks like I did paste it a little bit above the ground, which is quite all right, I can always paste it slightly lower. I don't mind if it goes into the ground a little bit. It could be a little shorter and it wouldn't mess up too much. But I just need to make sure wherever I'm copying it from, I'm thinking about where I'm standing, and I'm going to have to stand about that distance away from where I want it to be. Okay, so let me go a little bit slower here, just to be a little more precise. Now I know I have a hole right there in her hand, but I could always remodel her hand around it. If I get this off by a little bit, it'll be okay. I'm just going to Gmask air just to be on the safe side. And let's do paste minus A. Okay, that was way too far back. Let's try here. Too far back, just a little bit this way. Almost there. Okay, that seems pretty perfect actually. Let me see how that looks. Let me change my speed again. See, we've got a few mistakes right up here that I need to fix, but we got it pretty much where it was before. And we have it modeled, we've got our little gemstone on the top. And I can also continue to model this. Now that it's all rotated, I can go in here and fix some things. You can see that some things got messed up when we rotated it. Some of these sections got disconnected, but those are easy enough to fix by hand. Since the staff is supposed to be made out of wood, if I wanted even more detail, I could go in here and roughen up some of the sides, add a few extra little parts sticking out, maybe even some twigs that stick out on some of the sections. I'm probably not going to bother modeling that, but it's something I can definitely add later once we do start texturing it. It shouldn't be too difficult to add little things like that. I'm going to take these two staffs that I have and I'm going to just paste them over with my other backups. I don't want to delete them because I never know if I'm going to want them for something, but for now we're just going to move them out of our way. The only other prop we really have for this organic is the little pouch she has on her side. I'm just going to model this by hand, though I could do it with Loft, but it's such a small area that doing it by hand is just as fast for me. When modeling by hand, I do have to fly back more frequently to make sure I'm getting the right size, but it's still not too difficult. I think at this point the only thing we haven't modeled is the hair, and I was thinking about saving that till the next video because typically what I like to do when I'm doing organics is I like to texture stuff if I know there's going to be a piece of the organic that's going to be covering another one. Now I know I did do the cape on top of the dress, but when it comes to the hair, I was considering texturing all of this before adding the hair. But I think for consistency with this tutorial, I will go ahead and model the hair, but just know that sometimes I do save this step for after I've textured something. Usually if I have a lot of pieces on top of each other in an organic, I like to texture them before adding on to it. I'm doing it a little bit differently for this tutorial, but now you kind of know what my normal process would be. Because I want to use another placeholder block for her hair, I'm going to go ahead and retexture all of her skin to something that's a little more of a skin tone. We're not texturing or anything, I'm just changing the color of it, so it's going to be easier for me to model the hair. Anyway, let's go ahead and replace this. I do have it selected already, so let's go ahead and replace the white wool with smooth sandstone because that is probably the main block I'm going to be using. We'll just do that and deselect that. Alright, so now we've got our skin tone, and I have this brush already set up. I do need to get this block to use as a mask. Alright, so now I just have iron blocks, and I'm just going to paint them on her head, just like we did with the clothes. I'm just painting this on her head wherever the hairline is going to be. So I'm just defining the hairline wherever I think it needs to go. This part needs to come out a little further. So yeah, just define your hairline. So once you have the hairline defined, I know it's not the best placeholder block, I would use a different one, but I've been using all of the other ones that would stand out a lot, so I'm just defaulting to iron blocks because I've been using so many others. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and select around the entire head now. I'm going to do that same replace command that we did before. So I'm going to need to Gmask air, and then we're going to replace around the iron, which is 42, with 42. And you can see that made it all stick out an extra block. So That was pretty simple just to get a short hairstyle, but we need to give her longer hair. And there's many ways you can add hair to an organic. You could use loft, you could use spike, you could use a sphere brush. If you really wanted to, you could do it by hand. There's so many ways you could do it. You just gotta be creative with what kind of hairstyle you want to do. Now, usually I like to use spike, I will say, but I think with her hair, I might try it with loft because I know her hair is supposed to look very thin and straight. If you wanted more volume to your hair, I think spike would be a better option, but I'm kind of curious to see if I can get this to look good with loft, at least for the larger parts in the back. I might use spike for some of the front sections, but let me try filling out the back sections and seeing if I can do this. Let me turn on the world edit tracker so that we can see. I'm going to be G-masking air to make sure I am not affecting any of the blocks below me. And I'm just going to start a loft and try to figure out the back of her hair. I want to make it naturally flow over her clothing. So I do want to think about the flow of the clothing. Also, don't make it too long. I'm not exactly sure how long this is supposed to go. I think it goes at least down to her elbows. So I'm going to make it pretty long down here. Alright, I'm just going to do this little section. I know it kind of cuts into the hood there, but I'm just experimenting. So let's do loft set 42. Alright, so that's what we have there. What you can do with loft, because it is so thin, if we wanted to keep layering onto this hair, we could do it that way. So I'm just going to keep adding extra lofts on top of this. Since I did a layer down there, I might do a layer here. I feel like every time I do hair, I do it a little bit differently, just trying to experiment. This time I'm going to make sure though to go over the hood if I can. I do want to make sure the back of the hair is going to be touching the neck because it is not natural for there to be a gap right here in the back of the neck. Your hair is always going to be touching the back of your neck when it's this long. So I'm just going to repeat this process of layering one little section of hair at a time with loft. I don't know how well this is going to turn out, so I'll see you at the end and we will see. I have the main hair in place, although I think what I'm going to do is go through all of this and smooth it and try to separate out individual strands, or at least make it look like there is, you know, some kind of shape to it. Right now it just looks like a big mess. So I might go in here and look wherever I can see a groove in the hair and try to follow that and smooth the hair in that direction so it all looks like it's going the same direction. I think right now it looks like it's all tangled, and that's why I need to smooth it and try to fix that. There's lots of things I need to fix in the back, but I do think I like the lofted approach for this one, just because, like I said earlier, it gives off a thinner and finer appearance of the hair, and if you wanted more volume, you'll just use spike throughout the back, and it's going to be much faster to do it with spike and much easier, but I think in this case the loft is looking much better. On this side there's a weird disconnect from this part of the head and the hair, so I might do an extra loft right in here somewhere. Just make it drop down a bit just to fill in this. So now I'm just trying to fill in gaps wherever I see them. And after that, we do need to add the strands of hair going down the front, and those are going to be done using the spike command just because it's going to be easier. Alright, I need the convex selection in order to do these front strands. And the hair is connected right here in the front. I can fix that later. But for now, I'm going to start from the middle of her head because I see that's where she has a part in her hair is right in the middle. So that is also something I'm going to have to model. When I get up to the top of the head, I'm going to have to model that and make it look like it's bouncing out or like there's a part or a groove in her hair there. But for now, I'm going to start from here. And I'm just going to make this follow the shape of her face all around the outer edge. Let me make sure my selection is visible. Oh, I'm going to restart that because I don't know how that got messed up. But let's do point there, point there. Then we'll go down the side of her face right here. And we'll make it fall. If you wanted to add a little curve to it, just put the points closer together so that it will curve as it goes down. I'm trying to keep it as straight as I can. Alright, so those are the points I have selected. It almost looks a little too curvy now that I see it. If you connect the blue dots, you can kind of see it. Let's do spike 42. Let's do 4-1. Okay, that seemed pretty good actually. I think there is a little too much curve in there, or a little too much of a curl, but it doesn't look too bad. I still might keep it. Might keep the front strands a little bit curlier than the rest. And if we did want to mix in some spikes in the back too, we could do that. You could just layer it if you wanted more volume in some strands, but not everywhere. That's also a possibility. Let me go ahead and do the other side now. Let me see what damage was done. Over here by her face, you can see it's on the same level as that, so we can always fix that by hand. If I do need to add more blocks on the head, it looks like some of them got painted over, so I'm going to just add some of those back in to keep that rounded edge going. Maybe some right there as well. So yeah, we just gotta have to keep adjusting it until we get it looking right. This hair is super messy. You kind of got the general idea of how I go about doing it. I use loft for some and spike for some of it. I might use a combination of both, but just know what kind of look you're going for and what kind of volume you need. I also need to model some stuff up there. So I'm going to take a moment just to go around this by hand, and you can take the time to do the same should you see fit, but I will be back with you after this is all modeled. Here's how it looks now after all of that hand smoothing. You can start to see the individual strands of the hair and you can see the direction that it's going, and it just looks so much cleaner and much less tangled. It actually looks like it's got some kind of form to it, despite it being flat, straight hair. But I think this looks pretty good. You can see I added a lot to the sides right in front of the ears, just because that's how my drawing had it, but I didn't really need that there. And then I also added the little headpiece on the forehead. I just built that by hand as well, just stuck that in there, and I think with all of those things done, I think we have this whole thing modeled completely where I can go in and texture it now. But I do want to stress you shouldn't rush into the texturing stage. Spend as much time as you can on the model to where you're really happy with it, because it's going to be that much easier to fix before you add texture. At least that's how I look at it. Oh yes, we did forget to fix this, didn't we? This little mistake when we pasted in the staff. Little things like this I might end up finding and trying to fix. Sometimes I just need to force myself to continue, even when I don't feel ready. Actually, a lot of the times I do that. I apologize for the length of this video, but I hope somebody was able to learn something from it. Just be very patient with yourself and have fun. I spent at least 6 or 7 hours just adding all the modeling stuff for this organic. Just enjoy the process, and it will be more rewarding in the end if you can do that. Alright, I will see you in the next video whenever that's ready. Have a good rest of your day, and have fun building!